Hello, it's Lion here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another manga review. Today we're going to be looking at the first arc of Fire Force, which is actually the first 13 chapters, which would be up to that bookmark right there. And it would actually be 1.5 books worth of content, 1.5 volumes worth of content. But here, it's more or less, 2/3 of this 3-in-1 omnibus, right? So, yeah, Fire Force is written by Atsushi Okubo, who is the creator of Soul Eater, as it tells us right there. It's published by Kodansha, as you guys can see down there with their new logo, which I actually really like. I think it looks cool. But they still have very shitty quality control, so it is what it is. The demographic here is shonen, and the genres here are sci-fantasy and action. There's also an element of supernatural. Here, it's kind of like an urban fantasy, but with a much more sci-fi veneer, if that makes sense. Like, it reminds me a little bit of like Fahrenheit 451, or stuff of that nature, right? Like, there's like this sort of futuristic vibe to it, but also this kind of like creepy, like there's something wrong here kind of vibe to it, which I thought was pretty interesting. It does have an adaptation. It's actually quite popular. And I think it's on Crunchyroll. I've never seen it myself, but I know that it's well-loved. And the premise for this part of the story is basically that there's this alternative world, and there's these superpowered firefighters that are fighting against these inexplicably self-emulating, beings that just appear one day. Like, there's a person, and then suddenly they're just turned into these like fire demons. And so because these fire demons exist, there have to be superpowered firefighters to fight them. And we follow a specific character called Shinra as he joins the 8th company of these firefighting forces, and because he wants to become a hero, but also kind of ends up taking on a secret mission that he wasn't expecting, that ties into his personal reason for wanting to be a firefighter. So I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting, and I actually really enjoyed this first arc. I think it had everything that you needed from a first arc. Honestly, it might even have had more things than you needed to really get you excited about the story. But it was very cool, and I really enjoyed it. So let's get on with the plot line here. It starts out with Shinra walking to a train, or actually walking by a train. It actually kind of reminds me a lot of the first couple pages of the My Hero Academia manga. And an inferno appears. And then the 8th company arrives. And actually Shinra is about to join them. But he technically is still a civilian because he hasn't really shown up to work yet. But he doesn't really let that stop him. He takes off his shoes, or actually I think he burns through his shoes, and he actually uses his powers, which is kind of this fire based on his feet, to save one of the members of the company, who happens to be this kind of like fire nun called Iris. And he saves her, and then he introduces himself to the team, and then they all go to headquarters together. Then we get a bunch of background information about Shinra, why he is the way he is, what, his acronym or his nickname, the devil or something, it is, and why he is like that, and, his core beliefs, and his desire to be a hero, to both kind of honor his family, but also to figure out what was wrong, what happened, why he saw what he saw in this fire that took his family away from him. And it's all very interesting. I quite enjoyed it. We also end up having this first mission. Then we have this kind of very slight moment of like PTSD for Shinra. Then he mans up. He kind of shakes it off. He's like, okay, I have this issue, but it's fine. I'm here to be a hero. I have to do what I have to do. And so he defeats this inferno because it's basically like his moment to show off and kind of explain his powers, and then work together with his team for the first time, right? Then it ends with him being praised by people, and he makes this different smile from what he usually does, which is actually a very meaningful character trait for him. So It's really interesting how that works. I quite liked it. I thought it was really, really nice. And it further solidifies his desire to be, a good guy, to be a hero. Then we move on to a new kind of story point, which happens to be that this guy Arthur shows up, and he has this thing for being a knight, for being a cool guy. And he has a sword called Excalibur. He fights with Shinra because they're kind of like at odds with each other. They used to go to the same academy, and so they have this kind of like history. And then they end up fighting Maki, who is an older member of their team, who happens to be a different type of fire user. And she also happens to be ex-military, so she's kind of very badass compared to everyone else. And it's very, very cool. We get a lot of team building in this moment of the story. We get a new mission, which is basically Arthur's, first mission. And then we get kind of the same type of storytelling here, where there's an inferno, and then there's a situation that happens, and then Arthur gets to show off, but he also learns a lesson. And then Shinra ends up meeting this, or seeing this like mysterious fire user that's very suspicious looking. And then we move on to a new story point, which is the Rookie Games, which is a sort of early tournament arc, but not really. It's just a mild tournament. And I think it works really well to introduce a lot of characters that are going to become relevant later, without making you have to sit through a bunch of character introductions early on, which I think is great. I quite like how all of that works, right? So they enter this rookie game. It's just Arthur and Shinra, and then they meet some other players, specifically Tamaki, who happens to be from the first company. Then they learn that the game is basically this like simulation with a speed component, so it's kind of like a race to see who saves the most people first. But sadly, this event gets hijacked by this guy called Joker, and he shows up and he ruins the game, and it sets up a lot of mysteries, and it sets up the fact that the companies, the firefighting companies, are not really what they seem. And then Shinra ends up saving everyone, so he kind of wins the game. But because of the interference, the games were actually canceled, so no one technically wins. But Shinra gets the most out of it, and he actually ends up saving the most people, so you can say that he won. But it's not really that important, right? Then Shinra gets a little bit of knowledge about things and why things are the way they are. And he also realizes that the leader of the first company is a very suspicious character, and he's kind of worried about that. We end up having another mission here. And then we see that there's infernos that actually manage to keep their sentience to a very high level. And this is a big issue. This causes a big problem. Then there's a really good fight with Shinra. Company 5 shows up, which is another group of people. And they're more of a science division than anything else. They sip in, they have a confrontation, and then they take this inferno away. And then we get more information about why Company 8 exists and what this thing is and what their secret mission is. And overall, very cool stuff. I really did enjoy this whole segment of the story. In terms of characters, we get introduced to a bunch of them. Specifically for Company 8, we have Shinra, Arthur, Iris, who is a sort of fire nun, Maki, who is a second-generation fire user, I guess. Second-generation infernal, I guess is the terminology here. And she can control fire to a generic extent. And her preference is to make these cute little, like fire creatures, right? And then we meet Hinawa, who is also an ex-military member, like Maki, and he has a very specific type of fire control that is very different from all of the other people that are on his team, right? And then we have Obi, and he has no firefighting capabilities. He has no fire abilities, but he is a very good, normal firefighter, and he's also the leader of the team, and I really like this character a lot. He's very, very cool. Then we get introduced to Leonard Burns, who is the leader of Company 1, Tamaki, who is a rookie for Company 1, Hibana, who is the leader of Company 5, and Joker, who is this unaffiliated fire person, and he has very suspicious stuff to say about all of the companies, and it's really, really interesting, and I quite like all of these characters. In terms of world building, we have spontaneous combustion, which is the generic process by which these fire demons called infernals show up. we also understand that most of them are not really bad people. They just kind of spontaneously combust, and this actually causes them a bunch of pain, but also basically means that people have this very interesting, almost religious connection with fire, and so that's reflected across everything, right? This also leads to there being a church for fire. Then there's a firefighting department, and then there's a military department, and all three of them came together to create these firefighting companies, which are like the Fire Defense Force or something. And there's also stuff introduced about the generations of people and how they work. So Infernals are basically first generation fire users, and they're completely bad. The only thing you can do is basically kill them and hope that they didn't rampage before you do that, right? Then there's second generation Infernals, or fire people, and these people have generic control over flames, but they cannot generate their own. And depending on who they are and how they do things, their fire powers can be very different across the board. And then you have third generations, which are people that can create their own flames. And again, you can do this in very many different ways. So Shinra has fire control from his legs. Arthur can create plasma, which allows him to do a lot of things. Basically, he has a very advanced fire control, or very advanced heat control more than anything else. Maki, of course, has generic fire control. And Hinawa has this ability to use sparks to change directions. And he uses this for his bullets. So he has a very interesting ability for guns, which is really, really cool. Joker, I think, had a special type of ash, and Tamaki has this kind of this animal spirit type thing, which is really, really cool. And we also get to see a bunch of other cool things, but they don't really matter all that much. Hibana has a fire flower type power, which is really, really cool. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. And overall, I really enjoyed the world building because it permeates everything about the story. It's not just the secondary kind of aspect that doesn't really matter all that much, right? Like devil fruits in One Piece are just a thing that exists, and they are not something that exists that changes society so much that there's religions around devil fruits, right? It's very different from Fire Force, where fire is the one and only kind of religious thing. It's also a hugely cultural thing, and it makes people have different ways of speaking and stuff that reflect this interest in fire, which I think is really, really cool. It kind of harkens back a little bit more to Western style novels and how they all create a bunch of extra stuff for their world building, and I think that's really, really cool. I like that a lot. Art and fan service wise, the art is awesome. And it's really, really good. The fan service is fine. It's not horrible. It's not really my favorite, mostly because a lot of times I just don't care for it. But I don't really have an issue with how it looks. The art style is very, very good, so the fan service looks good. But the moments it happens in are not necessarily obtrusive. It's just kind of to me, currently, it feels like you really didn't need to have that. So why did you even bother when it doesn't fit into what's happening currently, right? But it also happens on a side panel or something that isn't directly affecting the story. So it also doesn't really matter all that much. So my feelings on the fan service in this part of the story are basically ambivalence, which I think is a lot different from a lot of people. A lot of people have a lot of issues with the way the fan service works in Fire Force. And broadly, I don't feel like that. I just do think that it was unnecessary to have it. So, there you go. That's kind of, it is what it is. That's kind of what I think about it. Ratings-wise, is a 5 out of 5. I had a great time with the introduction arc. And I really think that there's not that many introduction arcs that are this good. So, there you go. Fire Force Arc 1, or intro arc. And that's really all I have to say about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know your thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.